Hello everyone, this is James Nussbaumer, and I wanted to make this video for my friend in southern Australia, in a town called Goolwa, Australia, a river town. Barbara, a friend of mine on Facebook, had insisted that I go over and talk about what A Course in Miracles calls the end of doubt and the undoing of errors that I had talked about in my first book, The Master of Everything, a story of mankind and the world of illusion we call life. It's on sale everywhere books are sold, published by Ozark Mountain Publishing Company. For those of you that don't know me, I'd written this book entirely in longhand from prison, where I spent 8 years in prison. And then I also wrote this book, which is now released, called Mastering Your Own Spiritual Freedom, which is the sequel to the first one. And Mastering Your Own Spiritual Freedom is dear to me as well as the first one. It's kind of, they're like companions together. But there's a third one still in the embryo stage that's in the pregnancy stage, I guess you could say, that is at the publisher right now and will be released, I'm hoping November 1st of 2016, and that's called And Then I Knew My True Abundance. But Barbara and one of her other friends too, they kind of both sent me a message together as one, Barbara and Joanna, wanted me to go over, what actually was the undoing process that A Course in Miracles talks about, and the, getting rid of doubt and all that. What was going on in my mind when I was arrested and, was taken to jail, and from there went to spend 8 years in prison, was sentenced to 10 years, but had, thanks to a forgiving judge that came out of retirement, and I thank him forever. He knows who he is. It's just best, I don't have permission to mention his name, so it's best that I don't. But a forgiving judge had come out of retirement and had let me go after 8 years because he realized that this book right here was already on the market in 2015 when I was still in prison, and was released in March of 2015. I walked out of prison with this book right here, already in bookstores everywhere and on Amazon and such. It's going well. It's a little slow though right now. The momentum is building because really basically the reason that people don't know about my books here is that they just don't know who I am. They just don't know me yet. So many people around these little cracks and crannies and corners of the world, like Barbara and her friend Joanna, who messaged me from Goolwa or Goolway or Goolwa. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but it's in southern Australia, a river town. But they wanted to know, and we're going to get on with this now. And this is going to be a quite lengthy video, not hours, I promise. But let me get a little sip of water here. But I wanted to know what was going on in my mind, and how the undoing process had began. Well, all I can say is that my lawyer had called me and left a message on my answering machine to inform me that a warrant had been issued for my arrest. He suggested that I show cooperation and turn myself in at the county jail. But what I said to myself is, what does he know? Was my first thought really going on in my mind. I was angry about the whole mess, and I didn't understand why he hadn't by now worked out some sort of a deal with authorities for repaying the money that I had misappropriated as a financial advisor of 25 years. Yes, finally after 25 years, excuse me, after 25 years in a business that I did well at, I made a terrible mistake. A terrible mistake. But I wanted, so I just could not fathom why felony charges were necessary, but my own hopelessness told me that I was finished. I could have easily turned myself in, but I needed a few days alone just to gather myself and take care of the unfinished business around the house that I had. I had this beautiful 3-level home on a lake, a tranquil little lake out in the country, way out away from the city. But after all, bail had not yet been set, and it was unlikely that I would be able to come up with the necessary funds. I was just about flat broke, and envisioned my immediate future housed in the county jail, awaiting a trial. Well, I was preparing my mind for the inevitable. I stayed away from the house, my beautiful home. I stayed away from that as much as possible, never knowing when a police car would show up to take me away and off to jail. Well, one evening as I was driving through the country, as I often did and always liked to do, I was taking in dusk, the sun coming down over farmlands. I was just going nowhere, but I decided to check in on God. And I decided I headed to my hometown, which wasn't that far away, but it was a nice backcountry road drive to get there. My hometown called Massillon, Ohio. And I wanted to just stop in at St. Barbara's Catholic Church. That's where I went to school at. I wanted to sit for a while where I could, find memories of my childhood school days. And, that church had school, had been there for years, even before my time. In fact, my father went to the same school. My father now, as I speak, I'm 59 as I'm making this video, soon to be 59 here in a couple of weeks, okay? But in fact, my father, who now is still alive, he's 83. In fact, my father went to the same school, St. Barbara's in Massillon, Ohio. But I found that the church was locked up for the night. The sun had just set. It was like kind of dusk a little bit after that, summertime. But I really wasn't disappointed. I made a bit of a humor out of it and told myself that God must have closed up shop for the night. Well, I got back in my Toyota Camry, which was the car I was driving at the time, and I pushed in a Billy Joel CD. It was the Innocent Man CD. And I headed back into the country and back onto some more country roads. I would call that the scenic route. And I thought to myself as I sang along to the song on that Innocent Man CD, that one of my favorite songs on that CD called Keeping the Faith, I decided to pick up a pizza and a bottle of good wine and just head back home, regardless of any warrant for my arrest. After all, I decided, why am I hiding? Well, unable to sleep that night, tossing and turning while the obvious was flooding my mind, I looked over to the bedside table to see a red lighted numbers on my clock. As I was, just looking over to, oh, that's the clock, okay? Yeah, and it said 2 a.m. Well, I got out of bed and I wandered to the French doors on the second floor of the house that went out onto the deck, and I glanced down the slope in the backyard that went down to the quiet and tranquil lake. The moon just glistened and glowed over the calm, glass-like water. A moon like this had always sent peace through me. But the serene view was enough to just keep my eyes on the water, as an incessant ringing in my head alerted me to the thoughts of the police anytime coming by, who would soon be pounding on the door. I just couldn't get that out of my mind. I was just so paranoid about that. Excuse me again, but there was no escaping it. It was inevitable. It was going to happen. And I'd say to myself, what's the point in continuing to go on any longer with this charade of a life? These dangerous types of thoughts would run through me quite often. Still gazing down at the lake, I continued to punish myself with guilt. Guilt over guilt and upon guilt and guilt. I just felt guilty of everything that was going on. My life, it's coming to an end. My lawyer says I'm going to prison. What am I going to do? I'm just filled with guilt. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I noticed a circle of ducks in the water near the boat dock. It was right down at the end of the lot. The lot went kind of down like this, and there was the lake from the house, and but the water near the boat, and it was odd. There was a circle of ducks. I noticed a circle of ducks in the water near the boat dock, looking up the slight incline toward the house, where I was, standing out there on the deck on the second level. It was odd at this time of night for ducks to be on the lake, because there was a nature preserve on the other side of the lake that I was just used to, as me being a part of nature. About dusk, you could hear them quacking, and they went to the nature preserve to sleep for the night. But it was odd at this time of night for ducks to be on the lake, like I said. But even odder, it appeared that those mallard ducks were looking directly at me, maybe 50 yards up the hill to the deck that I was standing on outside the bedroom, looking at them. They seemed to swan back and forth as they paddled near the boat dock, while keeping a circle, a beautiful circle formed, watching me. They were looking right at me as I watched them, and it felt like they knew that I was looking back at them, I guess I could say. It seemed as though they were aware of my presence, and maybe, even my mood that I was in. The starry night was warm and beautiful, and so I put on my house coat and slippers to walk out into the yard and down the slope near the dock at the lake. It was summertime. Sure enough, these ducks were staring right at me. No kidding. Certainly it was strange, but of a peaceful kind of strange. It was a peaceful nature, as I considered these creatures of God simply stopping by to say hello to me. It's the way I took it that night. I picked up a twig that was just on the ground, bent over, picked up a twig, and just tossed it, into the lake, just to make sure that they were real. And of course, they, flinched, and then they paddled away. But even as they slowly streamed away, the ducks seemed to be looking back at me until they faded into the darkness. I sat on the dew-soaked grass and continued to stare out over the lake, which was my friend. For years I had known this lake, and I had caught many fish here. In fact, when I was a kid, a section of my property that I had owned at this time had been a fishing lot owned by my parents. But even before that, an uncle and aunt had owned the property, and many years earlier, back into the 1940s, my grandparents, my mother's parents, my grandparents on my mother's side, had owned the property right next door, adjacent. And so it's where my mother had spent much of her childhood on the lake, fishing, swimming, and boating, just like maybe sleeping out at night like I was kind of doing this evening. The property had passed out of the family, though, for several years until I recently purchased it, along with a new house built by the previous owner. Many would say what a coincidence that was, but, was it really a coincidence? Thoughts like these and my memories of the lake were overshadowing my immediate pressures, and I decided to lie down and gaze out into the starry moonlight sky until I dozed off. I'd have to say by this time it was wee hours of the morning. A cat nap I would allow myself, I thought. Then I entered into a dream that had only two characters, which were two different reflections of myself, each with a different shape and size, as though seen through a carnival mirror. If you know what a carnival mirror is like, where you look one way and you've got a narrow, skinny guy, and then you look another way and you got a short, squatty, fatty guy, right? You know the carnival mirror, that wavy kind of mirror. Well, one of me, which was the real me, had a tall, lean shape with a narrow neck and narrow head. You're like, arrow, arrow. With an animated face, of course, being, a carnival mirror. The other me was short and fat, with a round face and a round head that resembled kind of that of a sumo wrestler. The real me was thrown into a dungeon and sentenced to remain there for the rest of my life. The dungeon was dark and musty, and the only time I saw anyone was once a day, when the other me, a massive, unpleasant guard, opened the heavy steel door and placed a plate of food on the floor. He then would shut the door and go away. Well, I began to rot in the dungeon for years and thought I was going mad. Finally, I made a decision that I would rather die trying to escape than spend another day in that dungeon. So Barbara and Joanna of Southern Australia, I hope you're enjoying this, because it's for you and everyone else that's interested in this as well. But I thought I'd rather die than spend another day in that dungeon. Yeah, I thought I'd rather die than spend another day in that dungeon for the rest of my life. Are you kidding me? Who wants to live in a dungeon like that forever? But so my plan was to wait behind the solid steel door for the guard to bring me food. When the guard opened the door, I would attack him. Well, because the other guard, who was also me, was so strong, I, the prisoner, was sure he would overtake me and kill me. But I was fine with that, because I was better off dead than being trapped forever in misery and in darkness. Well, I positioned myself behind the door, getting ready. I reached over and braced myself against the door handle. When I touched the door handle, something strange happened. It began to turn. The weight of my grip made the handle move, and the door creaked and cracked open, making a loud noise. It wasn't locked. It just kind of, with the heavy weight of it, it just kind of moved open. I didn't know what to do. I stepped forward and opened the door a little further. It made a loud creak again, a loud crack. I looked into the hallway and saw the guard looking directly at me. This was very strange, since the guard was the other me, and very frightening, like I was being afraid of myself. The guard had a firm look on his face, but stepped aside as I, the prisoner, walked through the door and right out of the dark dungeon into the light. That was it. There was nothing to it. That simply, I was set free. I woke up in a chilled sweat and breathing rather heavily, and as the sun was coming up over the lake, also the ducks were back in the same serene circle right by the boat dock where they were before, looking at me once again. No kidding. Now, this is not the dream. I'd already woken up now, but they were looking at me once again. My eyes were teary as I sat up and thought about my dream, trying to make sense of it. After sitting there for a while, watching the sun reflect on the water, I realized that I had been my own prisoner. The dungeon was my own body, with a false or elusive self that was guarding over everything that constitutes who I thought I was, governing over and constituting over who I think I am. It was as though I had believed all along that I was sentenced to my body as if it were a prison cell. Yet the only thing that had bound me was my belief that the prison door was locked and that a frightening guard was always stationed there, making sure that I didn't wise up and leave, and that I must remain this way until I died. I thought to myself, man, all I need to do is change my belief in these things and the door swings open. I have never really been under guard and bound at all. I couldn't believe that all my life I'd been allowing my body to be a self-imposed limitation that kept me from who I was truly meant to be, or more so, who I need to be. I got up off the ground and headed back up the yard to the house while still in awe of the morning sun over the lake. But before I opened the door on the lower level of the house to go inside the house, I looked back over my shoulder like that. And for another glance, just to get another glance at the beautiful lake, because it was so beautiful that morning, I noticed the ducks frolicking and splashing, and their quacking sounded like the laughter of small children playing. My former frenzy left me, replaced by a mood of peace and calmness. Well, without any thinking, the softness and gentleness of that scene in my mind sent a message to me that everything was going to be okay. It was a feeling that told me to just let go, and I knew I needed to trust that I was merely starting over on a new path. Things and events were going to happen that simply had to be, but I would be fine, is what the voice inside me, a pure thought is what it was, more than an actual dialogue, a pure thought telling me that I would be fine. I went into the house to put on some clothes. I put on a pot of coffee and sat for a while in the house in my favorite chair, before deciding that I would take a walk around the lake. I noticed that I only had a few sips on my coffee cup. The coffee pot was filled, so I filled up my large thermal coffee mug, the one that I would usually take out on the lake in early mornings to go fishing in. And I filled up my thermal coffee mug, walked out the front door, climbed the outdoor flight of about 14 to 15 steps to the driveway that led upward to the street, and I headed down the narrow lane on foot that winds itself around the lake. As I sipped on my coffee walking around the lake, I enjoyed the awe of nature. There was a wood hen that hammered away in the background, and it seemed like a day that the fish would be biting. I had a fresh, clean feeling without any other thoughts as I strolled around the lake in an uninterrupted state of bliss. As I approached back toward the house, there were 3 deer that darted out in front of me, several feet in front of me, but that close enough to where I could see the look in their eyes. It was awesome. Meanwhile, the wood hen echoed again in the background, echoing off all the trees, the big oaks, and all the pines so high. I admired the gracefulness of the deer as they leaped into the wooded acreage adjacent to the lake. I found this to be an excitement on that particular morning. I guess, because of my lifelong fondness of these creations of God is why I was really getting into, coming face to face and seeing the eyes, eye-to-eye contact with those deer. It was just a beautiful sight. Now about 40 or 50 yards or so from my house is where I was at, as I'm almost home after walking around the lake. Now I'm about 40 or 50 yards or so from my house. I noticed a county sheriff squad car sitting at the end of my driveway. I knew why they were there. Without any anxiety at all or any nervousness whatsoever, I walked up to the driver's side window and identified myself as James Nussbaumer to the deputy. I was ready, I told myself inside. The police, the deputy sheriff, I want to say police officer, but he was a county deputy sheriff. The deputy sheriff gently and politely handcuffed me because that's what he had to do, and he apologized. Hey, it's normal procedure. He handcuffed me behind my back like this, guided me into the back seat, and he escorted me away. This was the last time I would ever see my home on the lake. Hey, Barbara and Joanna from southern Australia on the river there. I think, Barbara, you had said that where you live is on the mouth of a river. I forget the name of that, right there in southern Australia. I hope this answers your question. Hey, keep in touch with me, would you? And anyone else, please send this message along to anyone else that you feel needs to hear my message. And I hope it made sense. And Barbara and Joanna, hey, keep in touch, please. God bless. God bless all of you. Thank you for listening to me.